Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us for this, the second Blue Thread of 2025 with me, Mark Smith. So today we're going to be talking about the Valencia floods of last year, particularly lessons in preparedness and response. So today's topic is slightly different, I guess, to our normal sort of more technical topics. It's probably all the more interesting in that we're going to talk a little bit about extreme weather events and their effect on the communities caught in the middle, and also how do we learn about them. So how do we prepare and respond to extreme weather events, and because essentially extreme weather events will define us as a society over the coming decades, and whether we're used to them or not now, we absolutely need to get used to them. So we need to learn from tragedies that have occurred, and not so much to prevent them. I'm not talking here about mitigation. I think this is an awful lot more about adaptation. So how do we learn to live with extreme weather, and how do we particularly learn to keep people and property safe? So in recent years, the world has experienced an increase in extreme weather events, and of that there's no doubt. So many of which have been intensified by climate change. And although I wish to focus very much on the weather today, I don't want to get involved in whether climate change is causing the extreme weather or whether these are just sort of extreme events that have always occurred over history. In some ways, I think that point is irrelevant, because the events occur worldwide and they are linked really only in the devastation and tragedy that they visit upon the affected communities. And just to give an example, and what I've done is I've sort of gone and done some research and had a look back just over the last few years, and this list is by no means comprehensive. But if you take in 2020, you probably remember the year began with devastating bushfires across Australia. These were exacerbated, of course, by the prolonged drought and record-breaking temperatures. At the same time, in East Africa, severe rainfall caused flooding that affected 9 countries, in particular, I think it was Kenya and Rwanda. That resulted in hundreds of deaths and impacts over 1 million people. Then roll into the next year, 21. Heavy rainfall led to flooding, if you remember, across Western Central Europe. This is particularly Germany and Belgium. And again, horrifying pictures. Remember cars in the streets and people clinging to walls with rivers underneath them. That resulted in the deaths of almost 250 people with significant economic damage. And that was mirrored in the same time in floods in China in a place called Henan, where again unprecedented rainfall caused flooding, hundreds of deaths, and displacing almost 1 million people. We had a heat wave in the UK in 2022, for those of you that remember. Temperatures exceeding 40 degrees for the first time on record, which led to drought orders, tested the resilience of the water supply and the resources. At the same time, in Pakistan, floods caused by severe monsoon rains resulted in over 1,000 deaths and affected millions of people. Extensive damage again to infrastructure and agriculture. And then in, you can go through this in just a long list. 2023, you might remember Cyclone Freddy, which became the longest lasting tropical cyclone on record, affecting countries in East Africa. Again, nearly 1,500 people dead and widespread destruction. Storm Daniel caused catastrophic flooding in Libya, particularly in the city of Derna, where ultimately dam failures led to thousands of deaths and massive infrastructure damage. And then last year, 2024, was marked by unprecedented global temperatures. And the World Meteorological Organization reported 151, globally, 151 unprecedented extreme weather events. These included heat waves, floods, and supercharged hurricanes, resulting in widespread displacement of people and economic losses. And these, of course, included the devastating floods in Valencia, which we're going to talk about in some more detail today. In 2025, so far, there's been no respite. We've had severe heat waves in Western Australia, thunderstorms and floods in Northern Australia. And of course, here in the UK, if you remember New Year's Day, we had over 1,000 people evacuated in Greater Manchester due to flooding again due to extreme rainfall. So that's, as I said, that list is by no means comprehensive. It's just a very short snapshot of extreme weather events worldwide over the past few years. And of course, there were many more that haven't been reported. We only hear about them in the press when they're either close to home, Manchester, or particularly catastrophic, like in Valencia. But weather is local, so people are affected all the time for all manner of different sort of extreme weather events. And we're not very good at handling them at the moment. I think we tend to take them as an act of God, deal with it in whatever way we can, and then quickly forget about it. Now, whether you believe this extreme weather is caused by climate change or not, as I said, is a bit irrelevant, because evidence tells us that extreme weather events are increasing in ferocity and regularity. A very good report I recommend you read is in 2024, the World Economic Forum published it, called Quantifying the Impact of Climate Change on Human Health. And there was some really interesting figures in that. But one that really catches the eye is climate intensified natural disasters may lead to 12.5 trillion in economic losses and over 2 billion healthy life years lost by 2050. With, of course, the poorest and most vulnerable being hardest hit. It's always the poorest and most vulnerable who have the poorest housing and et cetera, who get hit, particularly by flooding. The other sort of document that I think is quite interesting to read is again, the World Economic Forum in its 2025 global risks. Extreme weather events was listed as the #2 global risk likely to present a material crisis on a global scale in 2025, with 14% of replies. That was second only to state-based armed conflict on 23%. So, and then if you project the timescale out 2 years, again, extreme weather was #2 when it was, you know, the risks over 2 years, but over a 10-year period, it becomes the #1 risk. So over a 10-year period, indeed, 5 of the top 10 global risks are all environmental, of which the top one is extreme weather. So as I say, I recommend everyone reads those reports, and sort of there's an awful lot of other really interesting reports out there, and it's very clear from those and from other things that the world really needs to get itself ready to face uncertain times driven by climate related events. I think whenever you sort of read about these, you hear words like catastrophic, unprecedented, you know, but they're not unprecedented. They are catastrophic, but they're not unprecedented. And it's just, you know, we need to, I think, as a society, globally, we need to get better at learning from each other, sharing the data, getting more prepared, having better warning systems in place, better alarms, educating people more to what to do in certain events. And what seems absolutely impossible in the height of the summer can suddenly become extremely dangerous. You know, the same streets, underground car parks, and we'll deal with all of these things in the next hour or so. But before we get into that, let's have a quick slide on some housekeeping. So as ever with the blue thread, all the microphones are on. I'm waiting for the slide to come up here. All the microphones are on silent. So, but we do want you to get involved. So there is an ability to ask questions, and if you type them in, then I will check them and they will be flagged up to me. Really encourage anybody to ask some questions, and we'll try and get some conversation going. Social media is really important to us as well. The blue thread has now been going over, I think it's about 18 months now. We've done about 15 or 18 of these different sessions on different things. And the more you can tell people about it, the more our audience can grow, and the wider reach we get. And so I'd like to keep it really active. So if anybody has any thoughts on an episode that they would like to do, or they would like us to explore, please just get in touch through the usual sources or the usual means, particularly on LinkedIn. I think that's where we're most active. And we will endeavour to try and use, you know, and we will endeavour to try and get involved and try and learn a little bit more about those things. If you want to speak on this, please just contact me directly. And again, we will build episodes around whatever subjects, so long as it's generally to do with water, the water sector, the environment. We're always looking for interesting case studies. So, to our case study. Maybe our guest could join us now on the screen. So, as I said, we're going to be talking particularly about the floods in Valencia. And in late October 2024, the province of Valencia in Spain experienced really catastrophic flooding due to what is a fairly well-known meteorological phenomenon, known as I won't say the Spanish, but it's Dana, and it occurs. It's not a unique event. It occurs when a mass of cold air at high altitudes becomes detached and then moves over warmer, humid air near the surface. And the contrast in the temperatures leads to intense storms, heavy rainfall, and flash flooding. So the event, as I said, is not unusual, and in the region of Valencia, it's not unusual. But in 2024, it did result in unprecedented rainfall and severe consequences for the region. Just in hindsight, the floods resulted in significant loss of life and almost 17.8 billion euros of economic damage to the region, with the response to the flooding really been facing extreme scrutiny. And this is what I'm saying. We usually have an event, somehow we muddle through, we deal with it, and then we look to who to blame. So residents obviously have expressed frustration over what they perceived as delayed alerts, inadequate emergency services, timeliness of warning, the effectiveness of the response, leading to public demonstrations, and of course all these calls for accountability are ongoing. And these floods in 2024, I think they underscored the profound challenges posed by extreme weather events. It doesn't matter if we're a very advanced Western society like in Spain, or a developing country somewhere in Africa. These are catastrophic to the communities that they hit, and they highlight the necessity for enhanced preparedness and adaptive strategies in the face of climate change. So lots of lessons, and I think I've spoken a lot, and I'm delighted to be joined by two experts from Binny's who will help walk us through the whole event. And I think we'll draw out some critical learnings, and we'll then try and pull it out and see where we can go, and how I think society, really, it's not just the water sector, it's society can learn from these events. So first of all, let me introduce Patricia, or Patri Cuervo, who's a regional development manager from Binny's. So Patri has lived in the UK all her working career, and she's over 18 years of experience in local government services, 3 years in the private sector, specialising in flood risk and drainage planning policy. She's a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute and a fellow of SIWEM as well. So she also has played a key role in major infrastructure projects, particularly in London, I think, in Thames Tideway Tunnel and the CESRO Southeast Strategic Reservoir option, and a co-chair of London Drainage Engineers Group during the London 2021 floods, which I didn't mention, Patrick, but anyway, you can tell us about them as well. And she was involved in emergency response and post-event investigations led by the Mayor of London. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank
really
you.
Looking forward to hearing from you. So second is Alejandro Garcia. Alejandro is a civil engineer and a flood risk specialist, again at Binny's. And even though he's from Valencia, you're based in Glasgow. That's right, Alejandro, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously you went to Glasgow for the weather, so that's really good. And you bring 9 years of experience in flood risk management and hydraulic modelling, having worked on projects for local authorities, private developers and water utilities. Expertise includes flood studies, surface water management strategies, which I think is going to be really important in all this. And you'll delve into the engineering challenges posed by the Valencia floods. So I think really we want to talk about overwhelmed drainage networks, and I guess the amount of water did overwhelm everything, and that tends to what happened when we get into the catastrophic situation. So let's begin. I think perhaps maybe I can ask you, Alejandro, to take us through the event itself in terms of explaining Dana. You could probably use the Spanish words if you want to.
Yeah.
And generally the topography which caused the catastrophe, and perhaps the impact, and then then Patrick, you can come in later when we talk about the consequences on the water sector. So over to you, Alejandro.
Yeah, okay. I think it's important to provide a little bit of context about what's Dana, and also explain a little bit the region, and especially Valencia, how the topography is, and other particularities of the area. For the people that is not familiar, Valencia is to the east of Spain. It's located in the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Probably you are more familiar with Alicante and probably Benidorm. So it's the city to the north of it. In terms of population, it's the third most populated city in Spain. So we are not talking about a small town. It's a decent size. It's almost 1 million population. So it's 800,000. The greater area will be slightly more. So in total, probably we're talking about 1.5 million people living in Valencia as a town and the surroundings, and the province is 2.7 million, so it's a decent populated area. So in terms of the geography of the area, it's really particular. Like generally, Spain is quite has a lot of mountains, and in this area in particular, we have a really mountain system close to the coast. So we have a really close mountains to this coast, and then a really flat plain that it was formed from alluvium, from obvious from this type of events that erode the mountains and create this really fertile plain. So that's one of the reasons that people populated that area, because it was a really fertile area. So the climate in Valencia is obviously Mediterranean climate. We have an average of, I would say, around 500, 600 millimeters rainfall per year. So, but a really common thing that happens is what we call gota fria, cold drop, and lately it's been called Dana, but before, years ago, we call it like cold drop. So it happens almost every autumn. So we have this kind of heavy rainfall happening on autumn. So it's really common during this period to have rainfall over 100 millimeters of rainfall in a day. So this is not unfamiliar for people from Valencia and also all the Mediterranean area, to be honest. One of the things that happens is, like, due to the topography of the area, having these mountains really close in Valencia region in particular, it's really intense, and then it's prone to flooding. So to explain briefly what's a DANA. So DANA it's an acronym that means high altitude isolated depression. I'm not expert in weather, so I'll try to explain it really briefly. So these danas form when the jet stream undulates, and if it undulates enough, a part of it becomes isolated and forming a pocket of cold air. So usually this forms in the higher latitude. So it travels down, and then usually it travels through the Atlantic, and then gets closer to Africa and Spain, and then sometimes stays in the Mediterranean area. So the problem that we have is, like, this cold area collides with warm air and really moist from the end of the summer, where the Mediterranean Sea is the hotter. So basically collides, and then what it tends to happen, obviously, is the warm air tries to ascend, and the cold air tries to descend. So when they collide, they produce these huge storms and intense rainfall. So also having the mountains, as I said before, what happens is the mountains pushes the hot air up, so it causes even more intense rainfall. So once we know more or less what's a DANA, we will talk about what happened exactly that day. So the 29th of October from last year, we have a DANA episode. So basically, it was extremely event. It's probably is the one the highest in records. We don't have any records that are exceeding those quantities. So basically, we start having rainfall from really early in the morning. So it continued raining during all day. And basically, well, I didn't mention that this is sorry, I want to make a note that this is an event that happens really frequently. So we have flooding in the region, like frequently. It's not yearly, but we have records of historical literature mentioning about flooding roughly every 30 years. So it's a recurring thing happening in the area. And there's been archaeological finds in the Roman part and the Islamic area of the city. So it's nothing that people is not used to it. I mean, this intensity obviously is unfamiliar, but it's something that it's flooding and heavy rainfall is something that we are used to it.
You said Alejandro, 500, 600 millimeter annual rainfall average, yeah? So how much
Yeah.
rain? How much rain fell in this event? Is there a record fell in this event? Is there a record for that?
Yeah, we have different records in different areas of the region because obviously it wasn't the same for everything. So in average, it was like 200 millimeters of rainfall over an area of 32,000 square kilometers. But we have that Patrick made the numbers, and it's twice the size of Greater London. So it's a decent area if we think about having like 20 centimeters of rainfall across all
In what
massive
period of
area
time? In what period of time? 24 hours?
in one day. So but we have the different stations, the rain gauges in the area, we have records of 780 in liters in some stations. Some areas were well above 400, 500. So that basically, one of the curious things is like all the rainfall happened in the interior. So in the coast, that was one of the most affected areas. They didn't have any rainfall or really very little rainfall. So it was this massive amount of water falling in the upstream catchments that then caused the flooding in the afternoon. Obviously, the areas that suffer from the heavy rainfall also had flooding problems and damages. So as I mentioned before, all this flooding occurred during the 29th, and one of the most affected areas was the area south of from Valencia. So Valencia has one of the previous events caused the diversion of the main channel, so the main river crossing the city. So it was southern plan, so it was diverted through the south, and in this occasion, we will say that it saved the city of becoming flooded because it acted like a barrier. But also what happened is like all the towns to the south of that new channel were affected, not because of the river, is because another ravine that crosses across this town. So that in that one, usually it's dry, that it's completely dry. So in that day, because of all the rainfall upstream, it jumped from basically 0 to almost 3,000 cubic meters per second, which in a few hours. So basically the channel had a capacity of around 800. So obviously exceeded the capacity and caused flooding everywhere. And one of the things is also, because I mentioned it's really flat, the flooding is not only constrained to the close area of the water course, it's spread in a massive area. If you have the chance of looking for satellite images of the before and after, you can see it's a huge area affecting a lot of people. So basically the impact, if I go briefly, it affected over 100 towns in the region, and then obviously I have the numbers here because this is a massive table of numbers, so I cannot remember all of them, but so it was over 100 towns affected. Sadly we had 224 confirmed deaths. We have 3 missing people, and there were like over 2,000 injured people, 2,600 people injured. And we have over 100,000 people needing medical assistance. So it was a huge event. So in terms of homes, it also affected over 10,000 homes, and plenty of cars were destroyed. 141,000 affected vehicles that were dragged. We all seen the images about all these mountains of cars piling on in streets. Sadly, one of the things that happened is like many people died trying to rescue the cars, trying to save the cars. And then in terms of infrastructure, we have also a lot of damages. We had plenty of over 300 300 kilometers of water courses affected. We had two damaged dams, two water treatment plants were affected. So, and over 123 wastewater treatment plants were affected. Transport, plenty of roads, over 800 roads. Well, I don't want to go through all the numbers. This is massive figures. So at the end, we are telling it also had affected because there is a national park there that it's Albufera. So basically all this ravine drains into the Albufera, and because all the sheer water that it was that day it got affected. So it was all environmental damages, all the cars, all the debris, all chemicals and everything was dragged there. So that how it will be calculated, I don't know, but it will be massive damage to the environment as well. So I don't know if you want to
No,
ask me something.
I think that gives us a really good picture, you know,
Yeah.
intense rainfall across a wide area, almost half a year's rainfall in 24 hours, you know, in an area that's used to flooding, but just didn't have the capacity to deal with this. So, I mean, Patrick, what were the consequences in the water sector? I mean, how it seemed everything must have been overwhelmed, right? There was just too much water, right? So everything.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly. The whole system was overwhelmed, and quite a lot of infrastructure was destroyed. In fact, the government, the regional government, had a plan, or showed a plan last Friday with giving us new numbers, and they were calculating the damages to water infrastructure, water and drainage infrastructure to in the region of 780 million euros. So in the water sector, if you divide it between the water, drinking water, water supply, and the wastewater, if we look at those two different aspects, so we had over 50 towns left without potable water due to widespread damage. At the same time as you have that kind of loss of potable water and loss of water in general, you have a double demand of water because of people trying to clean the streets. So you have pipe leaks, you have increased water usage for cleaning debris. So how do you manage that? There was a pressure reduction on the unaffected towns. So there was this water solidarity between different regions. People were urged to use less water, and they were explained why the lack of pressure. And there was also the use of local wells and desalination plants to meet the demand of the water. And then there was national and international cooperation. So we had the chance when Alejandro and I prepared an article for SciWem on this, and we had the chance to talk to one of the first people on the ground from different areas. So I'm from the northwest of Spain, and this person, Vidal, is the general manager of the water company in Gijón. And they met the day after this happened, and people on the ground, technicians, were volunteering to go to the south to risk their lives in a way, and to help these other colleagues in the water companies in Valencia, and to help the rescue efforts of the infrastructure. So, but we also had other cases of solidarity between other regions within Spain, and also from France and Morocco. Thankfully, full restoration of potable water was achieved within weeks, but there were also those concerns remains, and we were discussing about how fake news enhance that kind of perception of lack of potable water. In terms of
was that a problem, Patrick? Actually, misinformation, fake news.
That was a huge problem. But as you were saying, Mark, earlier, with all these events, fake news and the misuse of media is a huge problem, because it fuels anger and it fuels uncertainty, and is very disruptive. and it creates a lot of noise for people on the ground trying to respond to the event and trying to provide the technical information that is needed on the ground. That is all just noise, and bad noise as well. In terms of the wastewater damage, so we have 34 municipalities with huge problems in terms of the wastewater disruption because of the infrastructure failing and or not being able to fully function. In order to address this, there were temporary sewer pipelines and pumps to prevent untreated discharges. As Alejandro was saying, we have a Ramsar site, which is very protected, the Albufera, and there was, Alejandro, I forgot the numbers now, but I think it was like 3 billion liters of debris and contaminated water where got into the Albufera, into this Ramsar site within 24 hours. It's just huge. And then there was an issue when, well, many issues, but one of the big issues of the recovering efforts for the water and wastewater infrastructure was clearing the mud, the debris that was there, and afterwards, after the days passed, this mud became like concrete, really. So it was very difficult, and it still is very difficult at a local level. There's still houses with like houses infrastructure that is still leaking, and it is
incredible, isn't it? That silt, that mud, the damage it does in properties is incredible. You know, people think it's water. I mean, the water comes through and goes away again. It's what the water brings with it is one of the big issues, isn't it?
Exactly. So yes, and that's one of the big issues that they have to face now. I mean, they have addressed the major, the most of the infrastructure at a major level, like town level, but is the household waste blockages that is the issue at the moment, and it can have lead to health hazards as well, not just infrastructure hazards. So yes, that was the impact in the water sector.
And in terms of the, you know, you have the event, you have the emergency response, and then you have the recovery, and obviously you have a long tail in recovery, right? Okay, so
yes.
So you must have had all the sewers overwhelmed. You must have had sewage running through houses. You must have had all. I mean, how is that being dealt with now, sort of when we're in the sort of longer term recovery? And you know, how soon before things will get back to normal? Okay, so let's just say whatever normal is going forward. I don't know. But...
Yeah, I think it was pretty soon. So most of the potable water was restored within
weeks.
Within weeks. It's the wastewater treatment that is taking longer. But by December, they were saying that 90% of the wastewater damage had been addressed. So most of the wastewater treatment facilities, I think we were saying 123. So 90% of those were fully operational in December.
Okay.
As Padre mentioned, I think the main issue is when people were cleaning, they were just obviously putting all the mud into the sewers, so that became dry and blocks and reduces the capacity of that. So the main issue is like probably some of the areas, obviously some of the pipe trunks needed to be changed and clean. It's really hard because even with jetting, it's really hard to take. But they are obviously changing that. The main issue is some of the blockages that won't be complete. So if there is a new episode of heavy rainfall, the sewer wouldn't have the capacity to obviously to drain and convey all the water. So that's an issue that probably will take years to completely clean, if at all. I guess they will be prioritizing and trying to clean the main and the principal trunks. But I don't think it's going to be completely clean at any point, to be honest.
No, I think ultimately, you know, the silt gets into the sewer, it then hardens, it stays there, it reduces the capacity, and you know it's impossible to sort of get back to the original capacity. But let's go back to the original event.
Mhm.
You know, in Valencia, this is not an unusual occurrence, right?
Mhm.
So is there warnings? Is there alerts? Does that happen? Did people know about it? Was this a normal day, or how you know, has there been criticism that there should have been events? Because I know certainly in the UK, when we had flooding in London a few years ago, there's a lot of people were complaining, you know, that they hadn't been warned this was going to happen. And I think people also don't understand that when you're dealing with this amount of water, you can't pump rivers. You know, you have to somehow plan and have alerts and have safety alerts. How was that? Was that in place in Valencia before the event?
Yeah, the alert system, or the criticism was that the alert system didn't come on time, or a lot of people were alerted when the event was already there, when the water was already there, so it came late. It's very interesting to see the YouTube video of the general plan that was released on Friday for the regional government, and it shows a picture of a lot of legislation, plans and policy that kind of governs emergency response, and basically it say that it has I think it was 58 different pieces of legislation, policy or plans at a national level that had to link to 38 pieces of legislation, policies and plan at a local level. Not just, this is obviously not just for flooding, but in terms of any emergency. And then, and that was national level 58, regional level 38, and then you have the local level, which are the first responders. So the bureaucracy around emergency preparation and response and alertness is this is one of the massive criticisms that they're having at the moment, rightly so.
And of course, environmental damage is terrible, but loss of life is appalling, right? And we've had, you know, hundreds of people died here. I think, did people know what to do when this started? Do people understand? Is that something that we can learn from? Because, you know, going to get your car out of an underground garage is not a good thing to do. You know, all this type of thing. Is there an emphasis being put on this in terms of looking forward for the next event? Because it will happen again.
It's funny. I'll say funny, but it actually it was a red alert issued that day. But I think people, well, I mean, people from the region, I cannot blame them. I will be the same. I won't lie. You think, okay, it's another heavy rainfall event. You don't think it's going to be this magnitude. So I think people lost perspective and also loses that risk, like this perception of risk. So it's like another normal day, another day that it's raining a lot, and probably we are going to have some road cuttings and probably big puddles everywhere, but that's it. And I think people weren't aware. I think people react maybe when they got the alert in their mobile phones but that was really late, because when you got that, it's like, okay, something serious is happening. But it was really, really late. Also, one of the criticism, it was obviously that it was late, but also it was a really, really long, convoluted message. It was like nothing easy to read. Like, okay, it's flooding emergency, just stay home. That's it. Keep safe. It was I don't know. It was really, really long message, and not easy to read. So I think people weren't aware. It was like, as I mentioned, normal day. It's not flooding that is occurring every year, I would say, and this magnitude happens once in a generation or once every 2 generations. So it's something that you are not.
We have in the water sector a very good habit, and Patrick, you will have experienced this before, of dealing with an event, right? Okay, maybe we can fix the alerts. Then we deal with the event, and the emergency services are generally very good. And then we forget about it. And then it's I think we were talking yesterday, and you were saying 7 years later, nobody remembers it. Now, you had this event in Valencia last year, and a few years previously we had catastrophic ones in Germany. And yet there doesn't seem to be any learning there. We talk a lot about resilience of water infrastructure, nature-based solutions, flood management, and yet when something like this hits, we just don't seem to be able to deal with it.
Yes, but something like this, it was such a huge magnitude that it's very difficult to neither design infrastructure and big enough to take this, or to kind of be prepared, unless you do drills and you kind of remind people all the time about this. You were saying something really interesting there, Mark. We were kind of remembering when we talk about the 7 years of people forget within 7 years this type of event, but not everyone forgets within 7 years. The population that are suffering this, they are really scared to go to bed and sleep when they know that there's going to be rain. The people that obviously have lost families, relatives, they will be really angry that this happened. But those victims would have that trauma for life. It's not something that is gonna suddenly disappear within 7 years. The people, we saw the images of all the volunteers that went to respond to the event. Those people saw things that they weren't ready to see, because first they didn't have any PPE, or very little PPE, and then they got into a kind of war-like zone, where the day before they were just having a pint in the bar, So it is the mental health impact of all of those involved is something that doesn't go away in 7 years. And although we forget, in brackets, and kind of, as you say, in the water sector.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's most striking about these tragedies, and we touched upon this, is it's always the poor, the vulnerable.
Yeah,
it's always the ones who suffer the most. Now, we have a question come in about, did the adaptation measures that Valencia took after the 1957 floods to double the volume of water that could pass through, was that a key reason that the city was not as affected in the 2024 floods?
Obviously the main issue, obviously the diversion work and protected the city. Apart from that, the Turia is the river that crosses Valencia, or used to cross across Valencia. That catchment wasn't that affected by the rainfall, so it was almost full, but it was safe. The problem is, like, all the towns that are south from Valencia weren't there. Well, were really small when the 1957 event happened. So basically, after that, we had a massive migration from the rural areas to the cities across Spain. So it was like a big boom of construction and city growing. So those areas basically are like, I don't know, it's like 9 or 10 towns. And if you see the images, it's like a big city. It's like no separation between towns. And I think it's over 300,000 people living there. Well, before the 1957, probably will be a couple thousand, or a couple 10,000, 20,000 people living there. So it's been a massive growth, and obviously the type of land use, urbanization doesn't help. Or it's really common in Spain having like these underground car parks, even in flooding risk areas. I think it's something that needs to be, that's my opinion, I think it's something we need to learn about it, and probably changing and adequate the type of urbanization based on where, if you are in a flood risk prone area.
Yeah, I was speaking to somebody recently from Sao Paulo, actually, and they've had similar types of events. So they spend a lot of time on trying to get water off the streets as quickly as possible. So they have adopted this sponge city approach, where you have lots of green areas, and it's just trying to, essentially, their big fear is underground basement apartments, where people actually will be asleep, basically, and you drown in your bed. underground car parks, and we've had a question come in from somebody who's listening to us, and they're talking about, particularly Patrick, what you said about mud being a major contributor to blockages, and that even 5 months or 6 months later, underground car parks in particular is a big issue there. Yeah, is that right? And what is there any? I mean, that sounds like a big change in planning laws, etc., because everybody uses underground car parks in Spain, don't they?
Totally, yeah, we do. We all have underground car parks in Spain because we tend to live in flats, in blocks of flats. Yeah. So and particularly in that area. So yes, in terms of planning policy, I'm not sure what is going to happen. The regional government did say that they wanted a recovery plan that involved a specialist in all areas. So that is their objective. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of implementation. At the moment, they are in the phase of diagnosis. If it were in the UK, car parks would be what we call in planning terms ancillary to the dwelling use. Therefore, you'll have very little saying how that car park is changed. Really, you couldn't. It's part of the use of the home. Yeah, and in terms of your point on basements in São Paulo, the flooding risks of habitable basements, I have exactly the same fear in London. Having worked in central London with basement development is key because of the land uses, the very high value of the land in central London and the new development of basements. I'm not so worried about the new basements per se, but I'm really worried about the basements that haven't been developed and haven't been adapted to this type of risk, which is key in central London. Yes, and sorry.
No, that's fine. It's really interesting. I'm just thinking, you know, we spoke about some, you know, as I said, we talk about resilience, we talk about nature-based solutions, we talk about controlling and managing water. But what we're talking about here, it seems to me, is weather events that we just cannot manage, right? It is too big, right?
Yeah.
So this brings me to a sort of something that I'm quite keen on, is having that honest conversation with the public. You know, we cannot protect you from everything.
Yes.
And I think this is where there's a slight dishonesty in some of the things I hear coming out of political circles, and that's, I don't care what political circles we're talking about.
Yes.
But essentially, we need people to understand that extreme weather events will occur.
Yes.
And we need to be able to stay safe, because loss of life is the first thing, right? Okay, everything else can be fixed. It may take a long time, cost a lot of money, but we can't. You know, you mentioned people who won't forget, or the people who've lost people. All right. So do you think that as engineers, as water sector engineers, as flood man, do we need to be more honest in terms of that these things will happen and we're just going to have to deal with them and work with them? Because at the moment, all I hear is there's billions of pounds of investment and somehow everything will be okay.
I think sorry.
No, you go first.
Okay. I think engineers and people that work in the flooding risk industry and water industry, I think we are really aware that we cannot protect for forever and for every event. So I think it's probably more a political movement or initiative to start making people understand that they live in a really high flood risk area, and be aware of that, and not scaring people, but just make them aware that they cannot be safe from every event that happens. And be honest and put the instruments and the tools in place to teach people how to behave, what things what to do, what not to do, how to get ready, everything like that. I think education it's key. Also make campaigns. I don't know, I was thinking that they can do campaigns at the end of summer when autumn is getting closer and this type of events are more likely. So be prepared, be aware, just things like that. Don't save your cars, keep your valuables in higher levels of your house, anything like that, reminders, and that's it, because we can protect up to, well, 1 in 200, 1 in 500, any value, but then we will have an event that exceeds that, and flooding will happen. So in this case, well, we were mentioned before, it's for the flow across these towns, it was between 1 in 2,000, 1 in 5,000, the estimation. So even if there were a bigger water course, I guarantee you it won't be big enough for that event. So
Patrick?
I think in the UK there is a move towards adaptation and explaining to the public that there is a need to adapt. And one couple of years ago, I was involved with the Environment Agency, the National Flood Risk Management Plans, and the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management kind of roadmap. And it does have an emphasis, a change of emphasis to tell people that we cannot protect you, we cannot mitigate all the events. We need to start adapting to living with the risk. So there is an onus on people to understand the risk, to address it, and to, for example, have insurance, be aware of things or practical things like, will my house be insured? What do I do if there is a flooding event? Be prepared, have your plan, have your bag, your flooding bag, where you put everything that you need, all the valuables, just store them. So it is very important. I mean, it's not like you can leave that responsibility to anyone else. If you or your family lost their life, it's not, who cares who is to blame in a way, isn't it? They are not going to come back. So you need to be ready to understand that it's your responsibility, it's no one else's, to keep yourself safe and to make the right choices when they're telling you don't go out. Just don't go out, even if it is a puddle or even if your car gets damaged. That's fine. It is a car. It's not your life.
No, that's true. I think I was listening to somebody recently, and you know, we're talking here about floods, okay, right, okay, but we also have got extreme weather droughts, okay, and
Definitely.
I always think when somebody says 1 in 5,000 years, 1 in 500 years, there's a sort of a public response that, okay, that's happened, it won't happen again, right? But what we're saying is that given the increased frequency of these, you can have another one next year. Okay,
yep.
You can have, God forbid, another one in Valencia, right? Okay, and yet I think we somehow still aren't at that point where people understand that they have to live in a different way with water. And I guess I wonder really, have the people of Valencia, have they adapted their relationship to water? Has that changed in light of this event, or is it, you know, we had one in 1957, we had one in 2024, we'll have another one in, I don't know, in 2100. How has that changed, if it has changed at all?
Yeah, I think obviously now that this is recent has changed, and probably this generation it's going to change their mentality. I think it's a collective effort to keep this mentality in the next generations that haven't lived this event. Or so I think it's been kind of a slap in the face for our generation, that the last one we almost forgot about. That is like, that's old story. So I think now it's our responsibility to keep the next generations aware of this risk and be prepared. So I think it's the positive thing is probably be more ready and more aware about this.
And from an infrastructure point of view, you know, what more can we do, Patrick? I mean, you have a lot of experience in London. London is probably one of the most expensive real estates in the world. How do you persuade people to set aside land for sponge cities? How do we go about that?
Yeah, I was actually, if you don't mind, Mark, I was going to go into the infrastructure that was planned but wasn't implemented in Valencia, which is another of the big criticisms. We had Alejandro and I did quite a lot of research about this, and we have a long list of things that haven't been implemented, and we were kind of adding them up, and roughly goes between 0.5 to 1 billion of infrastructure, flood risk drainage and water related infrastructure that hasn't been implemented or hasn't been kind of maintained properly. And if you put those two things together, between 0.5 to 1 billion versus the 17.8 billion of damages plus all the loss, the human loss and environmental loss, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, you want to invest on flood risk on the ground, so you don't have to invest in the recovery, or the recovery is less, because obviously that infrastructure was never going to be designed for 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 5,000 year event, because there is no money, no one is going to give you the money for that. However, if that reduces the risk by 1/3, you know, is 1/3 of that 17.8 billion damages. And again, is what Alejandro was saying about why haven't we done this? You know, we have to deal with this now when it's far too late.
I think a lot of it is. I mean, we have a question come through about the language of the 1 in 100, 1 in 5,000 year flood.
Exactly, it's complicated.
We need to stop using this type of complex language.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to somebody, I said, you know, you can have 3 1 in 1,000 year floods 3 years in a row, right? Okay. Because each one is a discrete event, and yet it's not surprising people get confused, right? Okay, I think that's something that we can help. I've lamented many times about the poor scientific journalism we have sometimes around, particularly around water, and this is just an extreme example of it. But
Definitely.
I think perhaps Europe-wide we need to talk a bit more. I think you know, there is a whole industry in alerts, which is fine. Then there's the response, you know, the emergency response, which generally people come together, they help, and it works. And then there's a long inquiry into what went wrong, and at that point all the systems seem to fall apart. So I think we need to, as water engineers, we need to adapt our language. We need more education. We need to teach people that living with water means more than flushing the toilet and drinking out of the tap. And I think, you know, and of course that comes with a bill. And you give me a bill of £1 billion, €1 billion against a cleanup of 20 billion. But the problem is you need to spend $1 billion without knowing about the 20 billion. And exactly. It's easy as a politician to just say, okay, we'll put that somewhere else. Now, some other questions have come through that are about more political, and I don't want to get into the politics of Valencia. I don't know them, I don't understand them. So I'm going to park those. But, you know, as we come to the end of it, and it's been a fascinating conversation, maybe both of you could just give us 1 or 2 points that you think we could do better looking forward, perhaps to, you know, as engineers rather than as sort of observers. Maybe what are the 1 or 2 things that you think we should adapt in the UK or Europe-wide to help prevent these events going forward, or to manage these events better going forward? Maybe Patrick, you could start.
Yeah, my 2 key points would be catchment level solutions and kind of integrated with solutions on the ground or grey infrastructure. And obviously, as a planner, I'm going to have to say managing urban development better.
Okay. And Alejandro?
I think, apart from what Patrick said, I will say that education. I think educating people is fundamental. I think people need to be aware and not take unnecessary risks, and have a plan and be prepared.
And I think from my point of view, when I look at these events that come all the time, I think we've got to have a more honest conversation about water and how we live with water. Everybody wants to live near water until there's too much of it or too little of it. We can't live without it, and yet you get these catastrophic events. And you know, it's all well and good to talk about infrastructure and catchment solutions, nature-based solutions, but then you're hit with the 227 people died, and you know, how many of those needed to die? And the answer is 0. Okay, so we must remember that as well, because it is a human tragedy as well as a societal tragedy. Look, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I really thank you so much, Alejandro and Patricia, from Beneath, for talking us through this with the expertise. I know that you've written an article in the CIBAM Journal, and there's other resources out there, and if anybody wants to learn a bit more, perhaps they can get in touch with you directly or come through us in the Blue Thread.
Yeah.
But I'll draw to a halt. We've come to the end of it, and thank you so much for your company, and thank you very much for a fascinating conversation. Okay, bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.